Hi, HR Nation, it's Chris Rainey. Welcome to HR Leaders, the show where we interview today's most successful and innovative HR practitioners 5 days a week. Today we have a special guest. We're joined by Morten Hansen. Morten is a management professor at UC Berkeley and a faculty member at the Apple University. Morten, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hey, good. Thank you. How are you doing?
Not too bad. Thanks for getting up early to join us.
No, no problem.
No. Morten, for those that aren't aware of your work, could you give us a bit of an overview about your background and your journey to where we are today?
Yeah, thanks. I started out in London, actually, working for the Boston Consulting Group after I finished my school years there. And then I decided I want to become an academic. So I jumped over to the academic side and got a PhD from Stanford Business School. And then I went to become a professor at the Harvard Business School. And then I went to INSEAD in France. So I've been moving around, and now I'm here at UC Berkeley in the middle of Silicon Valley. And I study, as an academic and as a management professor, I study collaboration, innovation, and leadership development. And I spend a lot of my time in executive education and working with leaders at Apple when I have the part-time job of Apple University. So that has been my journey, and I have obviously spent a great deal of time with HR leaders in all capacities, including the learning and development community, and talking and helping how we can change how we work and how we can develop leaders better. The new book, which is the Great at Work book, is my third. My first book was Collaboration, and I spent a great deal of, in my area expertise, looking at how we can collaborate better in companies. Every HR leader knows that's a challenge in most large companies, even small ones. And my second book was with Jim Collins. It was a sequel to Jim's Good to Great, and it was called Great by Choice. And now we have the third book, which is The Great at Work.
Fantastic. Well, I'm really excited to get into this. I've been wanting to speak to you for some time now. So let's start with a simple question then of, or I say simple, but it's a very important question. Why do some people perform better at work than others?
Yeah, it's a simple question, a difficult one to answer. Yeah. And there are probably at least 1,000 books out there on that topic. I wanted to approach it differently. As an academic, I wanted to do a study on that fundamental question. Why are some people performing better, managers or employees? And to do that, we devised a large study of 5,000 managers and employees in many different industries and in many different jobs. And we wanted to answer that question of why we see some people performing better than others. And what came back quite surprised me. We found that 7 key practices explained 2/3 of the performance difference in this sample. So it isn't about being good at 200 different things in your job. It is about understanding the key drivers of performance. Now, it doesn't mean that those 7 key practices are the only determinants of performance, because they don't explain all of it, but they explain a majority of it. And some of those are very surprising to me, and it's in the nuance, really, if you want to understand the difference between good and great.
Could you share those 7 practices that you identified?
I could do them in sort of the headline, and we can get into it more in depth. Mm-hmm. And I believe they have vast implication for HR in companies if we take them seriously. So I divide them into 2 buckets. One is mastering your own work, and the other one is mastering working with others. So the first one, mastering your own work, the first principle is what I call do less than obsess. It is the focus principle, if you like. But I think we have misunderstood focus, because we think about it's a matter of prioritization, choosing to prioritize. But as a matter of fact, it's also the obsession part. And I use that word deliberately to hammer that point that it's about obsession. So that's the first principle. Second is redesign work for value, that the top performers in our study, they innovated how they work, and they just didn't accept conventions. The third one is fascinating for HR leaders. I call it the learning loop. It is how did they develop continuously in their job? And they did it very differently from others. And it's kind of debunking the myth of the 10,000 hour rule to master a skill. It's not about that. And then the fourth one is how do we get people to be motivated? How do we drive them? And it isn't about passion. Passion is important, but it's something more important, and that is purpose. The top performers in our study have what I call P squared, passion and purpose. And then the question, of course, becomes how can we get people to have both? And so that's the bucket of mastering your own work, that you're working on very few things that creates enormous value, and you innovate your work, and you continuously develop that, and you put passion and purpose behind it as the engine. That creates masterful performance on your own. Now, mastering working with others, there are 3 principles. The number 1 is what I call forceful champions. These are individuals that are able to both inspire and persuade. So they get our emotions going, they're inspirational, and they're able to play politics, persuade people
Yeah.
In a difficult situation, and they get support for their project and initiatives. Then we have the second principle is what I call fight and unite, which is about how we really run group meetings, having a good fight and being able to unite people behind decisions. And then the last one is what I call discipline collaboration. And we have 2 sins of collaboration. One is under collaboration. We work in silos. Many people will recognize that. But we have a second big sin or problem in companies today, and that is over collaboration. Too much collaboration on the wrong things, and it just chokes the organization. So you need to do something in the middle, which is disciplining collaboration. These 7 principles constitute what I call the key work smarter practices. We tend to use that term work smarter, and it's a cliche. I mean, who wants to do the opposite, right? Work dumb.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to work dumb. But we don't know what that means. That cliche is empty. It's a slogan. And so what this study and book have done is to fill it with substance in terms of 7 key practices that we can implement in the organization just for our own work, and also get others in the organization to do so.
Which of those practices do you think that HR can have the most impact and influence over?
So I think all of them impact how we lead HR organizations. So first of all, let's assume that we have evidence now for what matters in performance, that these 7 key practices are really important. All right, what does that mean for our recruiting? If you are looking for your recruiting, are you actually recruiting according to these standards, right? If you can select people who have a natural inclination towards some of these, right? They are very good at doing less and obsessing, for example. In fact, a CEO of a large company emailed me last week, and he said, I read your book, it's fascinating, but I have a question for you. Have you developed guidelines for how we can use these standards to recruit people? I said, no, I haven't yet, but that is clearly a next step. And so that makes sense, right? It impacts recruiting. Now, it impacts how do we assess people, right? Are we assessing people according to these 7 practices, or are we doing something completely different? And as a matter of fact, I think oftentimes we are assessing on the wrong things. We can get into that. So we promote and reward the wrong kinds of people and behaviors. And that's a problem, so we need to re-engineer that. Then it has huge implications for how we train and develop people. How are we developing people according to these guidelines, and how are we doing it? And here I can point to the thing I call the learning loop, which is a fascinating implication for the training organization, talent development organization in any company. And we have this myth that it's about practicing. So your 10,000 hours will make you a masterful person. And it's kind of like blind repetition, and it doesn't work in development of professional skills. It's not about the quantity. And the big problem we have here in training in companies is that it's episodic. We go to training seminars. Even if it's online, it's still a module you complete, right? So you and I was talking about this before the show, that we've both been competitive athletes. Athletes do not train this way.
1-day workshop and then you're done.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, imagine you're training to run a marathon. And you go to a workshop, a training seminar for 5 days, and then you don't do anything because you're too busy doing other things for the next 3 months. And that doesn't make you a great marathon runner. So we need to get away from this idea of this episodic training to continuous training, because in our study that's what the top performers did. They may not have had the great support of their HR organization to do it, but nevertheless, they did on their own.
So
And
yeah, that's what I was going to
yeah,
ask you. So did you find that they mainly took it into their own hands? The top performers just really went out and developed themselves. Is that what you found?
well, we saw a mix. Let me give you an example of what I mean here, because I think it's so important. It's a person called Brittany Gavin, who was a middle manager in a large hospital here in the United States. And she was running a staff of maybe 20 people. And she wasn't, she was quite mediocre. She wasn't a good manager at all. And there were complaints about, she was in charge of all the food delivery in the entire hospital. Patients were complaining about the food, they didn't get the kind of food they needed for recovery. A lot of problems with the food part of the entire hospital. And the problem was that she didn't get enough ideas from her staff how to improve. So she started running sessions with her staff about how to improve and come up with ideas for implementing improvements in their food delivery system. And but she didn't know how to do it. And so she said, well, I'm going to practice how I do it. So she got a coach. So that was a benefit she had. The HR organization did give her a coach. And then they looked at how she was asking questions in her staff of 15 people around her in a huddle every Monday morning in her staff meeting. And she was asking the wrong kinds of questions. She didn't get any ideas. Then she learned how to write the right kinds of questions. She got more ideas, but she didn't follow through. Then she learned how to follow through. In other words, every time she did something, a very small thing, she did something, she got feedback on how she did it, she corrected herself, redid it, did better, got more feedback, right? Is that learning loop that you use in sports, and it's continuous, right? It is immediate, it's continuous, and you keep on improving. It's quality of practice. She was running a meeting every Monday for a year and a half. That's a lot of meetings.
Yeah.
Now, if you run down on autopilot, you're not improving, obviously. But if you really take care to practice and prep a little before the meeting, what kind of question, and make sure you get feedback after every meeting. How was it? How can we improve? Now you're having a rate of learning. So what happened to Brittany Gavin was that over 18 months, they proposed 120 new ideas for improving food. They implemented 80 of them. And
Wow.
you saw food quality in terms of patient service going up by more than 30%, stockouts going down, safety problems that evaporating. Of every measure, there was enormous improvement. So here is a person who was running, say, a mundane job, doing something that every manager is doing, running staff meetings, and just using the learning loop, the quality of practice. Now, from an HR point of view, if you look at that and think, well, that's real great on-the-job learning. How do we actually get that done in companies, right, on a larger scale? Because if you can get managers to do that, systematically across the board, you have a phenomenal learning on the job system in your company. It's far more powerful than going to a seminar for 3 days, right? So this is the difference, right? If we can get people like Gavin, and others to do that, we can improve a lot faster in our company. And the results, right? The results will roll up. Now they have an excellent food delivery system in that hospital.
Mm-hmm. I think everything you said makes so much sense, and I've heard it so many times. Why aren't companies doing this already? Why are I can tell you right now, because I provide workshops to the biggest companies in the world. I am someone who does the 1 day workshops as well as the ongoing learning. Why is that still the mentality?
Right.
Why is that still the way people do?
Right. And I do the same, right? We both do that. I run executive education programs. They're like 3 days long, 4 days long, right?
Yeah.
And so I struggle with the same problem. So I think there are a bunch of barriers to this coming from the HR organization. So here we need HR leaders to innovate how they do HR. So first of all, take the annual performance review system. Okay, many people, the only real feedback they get on the job is through the annual performance review system. Now, if you have a boss or mentor who gives you continuous feedback, you're lucky, but that is not systematic. That is sort of like ad hoc. So now imagine, just think about how really ludicrous it is to do an annual performance review, right? So imagine you're the coach of Roger Federer, the tennis star, right? And you're observing him serve for a year. And then after a year, you sit down with him for an annual performance review. You say, hey, Roger, I think you were serving a tad too much to the left last year. Next year, could you please serve a tad more to the right?
Yeah, it's crazy.
Absurd, right?
It's just crazy.
But that's what we do.
Yeah.
That's what we do, And that's like Brittany Gavin telling Brittany Gavin, look, I don't think you are running your staff meetings really well last year. Can you run it better next year? It doesn't mean to lead to improvements at all. So we need to, and as you know, some companies are dismantling the annual performance review system.
It's a big talking point right at the moment.
Right, yeah. Now, I don't know if you should dismantle it, but the problem is that it takes up so much time and effort that we don't have time to institutionalize an ongoing feedback culture, right? I mean, that's what people do in sports and other performance areas in our lives. You have a feedback and rapid feedback culture.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We don't have that in companies. You need to get that. So I think that's one barrier. The other barrier is actually these large training sessions that we do because they take up so much bandwidth and attention. So we spend all the time and effort to put on a 4-day show, say a training, and we don't really have the resources to do something that is more continuous. Now, I do believe that both have a role to play and we need to complement them. So what company needs to do is to put in a systematic effort at this continuous development. And that's lacking in most companies. And it's not an easy thing to do because you can't just hire coaches for everyone. That's too expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And even coaching, executive coaching is continuous, but the coach cannot be sitting in on all the meetings all the time. They're not there when you're doing your work, right? That would be way too expensive. So we need a different system. Now I think technology is the answer. We need technology systems that can enable people like Gavin to get rapid feedback.
Mm-hmm. In real time. Yeah.
In real time, yeah. So I have developed it's a research program. We have developed a pilot and an app that sits in the phones of these 600 managers who are actually piloting this idea. And the idea is to say, okay, this Brittany Gavin at that hospital, can we create an app that can be that coach in the pocket for that person? And not a live coach, but somebody who can actually do the thing. And basically what we did is we said, these companies have a leadership competences, right? All companies have that. And then we said what I call micro behaviors. What are the practical tips or nudges that are really implementing those behaviors? And then you get in this app, you get these nudges coming to you. And then the app will allow you to get feedback from the people who are then observing you, and then you can modify your behavior. So the app allows you to get that feedback loop going on your own, right? So give an example. Most managers run meetings, and I usually tell managers, well, how many meetings do you run a day? Well, at least 2, right? Probably more. Okay, that's 10 a week. That's 500 a year. That's 1,500 meetings in 3 years. That's a lot of repetition. Now imagine you can run those discussions in those meetings better, okay? So the fight and unite principle. So if you then log into this app, it will send you tips and micro behaviors for how you can run better discussions in meetings. So for example, it might say, start a discussion by launching open-ended questions and not stating your opinion, because that will bias, the discussion. So then you run open-ended questions and prepare 10 minutes before the meeting what should be the questions. You ask some questions. After the meeting, the app will send out the feedback request to the people in the meeting. How was the debate and how were the questions? And you might get back a comment that says, great to start with a question, but they were too vague. They were too open-ended. It didn't focus the conversation. So you get that feedback, then you might say, well, okay, next time I need to be a little more focused in my questioning. And there we go again, right? So it improves.
Is it anonymous, the feedback, or is it completely open? Everyone can see.
So we have experimented with both ways, right?
Yeah, I was wondering.
The app can turn it on or off anonymous. So it's a great question because
people are scared to tell their director that he didn't run a great meeting,
Yeah, and I think that depends on the company culture. Some cultures that is absolutely the case, mm-hmm. and others you wouldn't tell it, so then it should be anonymous, right? Again, it needs to be customized. I would say this thing that when I started looking at that app, I looked around because there are many apps today in the HR space. I mean, I think we're inundated with apps and technology, but I couldn't find anything that did something like this. So we developed it as a pilot on our own. And I think this is the future. I think the future of talent development is going to be learning on the job, where we have HR systems and support that enables people in the organization at scale to do what Brittany Gavin did, which is this learning loop in practice.
Yeah.
We're not there yet. I haven't seen it, but I think this is the future.
I definitely agree, because it's two things. One, it's meeting people where they are, and everyone's on this.
Yeah.
Everyone's on the mobile, right? So you're removing the friction from it as well. You're making it so easy for people to be able to do it.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Because for the first time in our lives, really professional lives, we're walking around with a computer in our pocket.
Exactly. You remove the friction.
And why? So that means that when I'm working as a manager in a company or a professional, I should use that device to help me develop on a continuous basis. And we have HR systems and learning systems that are not geared up for that. And I'm guilty as everyone else, because I do run those workshops and I run those executive training programs. And I do believe they are important. I believe what we need is a complement, right? So what you run and what I do is really important. And we need this additional system and support from HR in companies. And this is a great place for HR to innovate.
Yeah, definitely. So is there any practical steps that you could share with HR leaders that they can start straight away in your organization, in terms of like to work smarter and instead of harder immediately? Are there any sort of systems or practical steps that we can implement straight away to help us do that?
Yeah, first of all, I think HR people should run training seminars on how to learn, how to do continuous development. And use examples. There probably are lots of examples in any company, or the kind of the have an example saying, well, here's a learning loop kind of idea, or as Anders Ericsson from Florida State University called it deliberate practice. And in companies, I think it's better to call it learning loop, because it's not about practicing, it's about learning on the job. I think we just have to teach people how to do that, because you can then take it upon yourself to do it. I think that's one very practical step. I think the second one is start working on instituting continuous feedback culture. There are apps out there to do feedback. It could be an email system. It could just be, and again, teaching people how to do feedback. So I think those are in terms of talent development, those are a few things you can do. When it comes to the larger issue of how do we drive better performance in companies, and how can HR help there? I think there's one huge thing HR can do, which is oftentimes we pursue the wrong performance metrics in companies. So if you think about it, in large HR roles should really be around what are the metrics we are measuring performance on in our company, in every job, every skill, every location. And here is what we discovered, that lots of time people are chasing the wrong metrics, what I call volume metrics, and not value metrics. Giving a quick example. So we come across this guy who was running a logistics function, a warehouse in a company. And his job was to make sure the shipments went out of the warehouse on time and be sent to their industrial customers. He had one metric: the number of times the shipments left his warehouse on time. And by that measure, he was an impressive performer. 99% of the time, it left the warehouse. But then the CEO of the company surveyed the customers, and the customer said that those shipments only arrive when we need it 65% of the time. In other words, they're late a third of the time. So basically, he was measuring when the truck leaves his warehouse,
rather than when it's delivered,
and not when it was delivered.
Yeah.
And when it's delivered is a value metric. It is what benefits you provide to the customers when we need the product. But he was doing it according to his own internal metric. And very often in companies, including HR organizations, we're looking at those internal volume metrics. So when I hear HR organization measuring the training programs that are delivered, the number of performance reviews that have happened, the number of people they have interviewed, the number of people they have recruited, these are all volume metrics if you think about it.
Yeah.
Right? Number of training courses delivered is checking the box, right? Now, value metrics are different, right? They're not even return on a training course in exec ed. They're what are the benefits that we are actually providing to customers or internal customers. And we need to get away from these volume metrics. And it's across society, by the way. I mean, think about, at least here in the US, medical doctors, they measure the productivity, physicians in the office, by the number of patients seen in the office that
Rather
day.
than ones that are made better.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right?
Yeah, right.
Which, if you think
Everything.
about it, it's insane, right? I can see lots of patients, but it doesn't mean I'm providing the right kind of guidance.
Mm-hmm.
Lawyers, billing by the hour, as opposed to solving legal problems. So HR, what HR can do here, first of all, get their own metrics in order, right? Not volume metrics, how much we're doing. Because at the end of the day, people don't care about how much you're doing.
It's the
What are
value.
the value we created, right? Which is harder. It's harder. And it's
I was about to say that because I always ask that question on the podcast,
yeah,
and sometimes people find it very difficult to give me the answer because they talk to me about what they're doing and they always talk about their volume metrics in most
yeah,
cases. And when I flip it on the head and say, "So what was the value to the business?" It's that most of the time they just stop for a second and what was the result? What was the outcome? And
right.
like, oh. And no one
Yeah,
can really talk about it. So you're right. Why is you think it's just a culture again? A
yeah.
culture. It's a culture thing. That's just.
I think we
Embedded in
have
businesses.
yes, I think we have, and this is what we discover in our research in the book Great at Work, which is we have a culture of working hard is sort of a proxy for performance.
It's
So
again
the
working
more I
smart.
do,
Yeah.
yeah, the more I do, the more hours, the more project, the more HR training programs, the more people I interviewed, seemingly the more I have accomplished.
I've got such a great
But it's
example
not
for
true.
you.
Yeah,
I've got such a great example for you. So when I started, my first job in the World Trade Group was in sales, and sales is a great example because when I started, it was always measured by the number of phone calls you make
yeah,
and the number of customers you speak to, and
mm,
those were my metrics. So my dials and the amount of sort of sales
mm,
propositions that I had out
mm,
there, and also lastly, the number of hours I spent on the phone. And I
mm,
would constantly have arguments with my directors and saying, "Look, I'm top of the sales board," and they'll be
yeah,
like, "Chris, but you had the lowest phone calls, the lowest dials, and the lowest the pitches." But I said, "That's not the, but I'm getting the most sales." And then yeah, but you're not getting. And I literally would go crazy because I'm like, "Well, I'm achieving more than everyone, but I'm not doing the numbers. So why does that matter?" And
right,
it was a constant, and a lot of the best salespeople in the company
yeah,
had the same thing. They were the best sales guys, that bringing in the most revenue, but they
right.
weren't meeting all of these metrics that were put in place by the sales directors. And I was like, it never made sense. I said, I can either take the shotgun approach and spray everywhere, or I could take the sniper approach. And I said, I'm a sniper. I said that to my sales manager at the time.
But here's the thing: the reason you were doing so well is probably it's related to the fact that you weren't doing
Yeah,
as many calls, right?
exactly. I was
You were
spending
more
more time.
targeted.
Mm-hmm.
You spend more time on the real prospects,
Yeah.
right? So that is a great example because exactly what we found. What you were doing there is this do less than obsess. Instead of the shotgun approach to sales, I am much more targeted, and I can really go all in on those things that matter, and then I will produce better.
Yeah.
So here, but it's a great example also because now let's link this up to HR. So here's what HR can do in companies. They can observe that that is what we're doing in sales, something similar to that. And HR can come in and say, let's work to reset the metrics here, right? We're now a business partner in trying to drive the better metrics in the company. And let's say your HR came in and said, okay, let's reorganize or re-engineer the metrics we're using for sales tracking, right? And more around the performance, the value created, and less about the volume of activity. And you do that, and what will happen is that you will then see the results go up in that sales. HR leaders are adding value because they're coming in and providing something that is new and different and better.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I think HR needs to do, because at the end of the day, your HR is a very important function in companies, and managers are asking, what value are you providing? And this is an area where you can. It's a great example.
Yeah, you just made me think of it off the top of
Yeah,
my head as well. It's the same with everything. I think you do. For me, again, it was in sports. I never measured the amount of times I did an activity. I just measured the time that I achieved it. You know,
right.
where I used the skateboarding example before we
Mm,
spoke. I never thought about the 1,000 attempts. Really, you
mm,
know, I was thinking about the result at the end of
mm,
landing the trick. That was the goal. That was the value
mm,
part, not the on the other side. So very interesting.
Mhm.
One of the things I wanted to speak to you about, because I know you did a recent post where you spoke about the productivity side and
Mhm.
how to make sure that we're more productive. Could you share more on that?
Yeah, so it goes a bit back to the question we just were talking about, which is how do we perform better? And it's not about just doing more. It's not about adding more hours. It's not about adding more activities, more metrics, more KPIs, and so on. We need to do less, but do the fewer things and do the right things. So one thing we discovered is the hours worked, right? So we think that the ones who are going to achieve the most are working the hardest, right? And a lot of people think, hey, the way I can get to the top is to work the hardest, right? Turns out not to be true, right? So what we have found in our data is that it's an inverted U in terms of hours and performance. Let me explain. So if you are in a full-time job and you're working 30 hours a week, it pays to increase that to 50 hours a week, right? Because 30 hours in a full-time job you're a bit slacking, right? So going to 50 hours pays off. Now, from 50 to 65 hours on average per week, which is a lot of hard work, the bang for the buck really, really flattens. So you're not getting an extra really benefit of it. And beyond 65 hours on average per week, you're actually seeing performance decline. Okay, so the guideline here is we want people to work hard. 50 hours a week, that's hard work. And this is data from the United States. It might be slightly different in different countries, but nevertheless, it's hard work. But it's not about getting people to work even harder. It's not about getting people to say, hey, how can I motivate people? How can I engage them more? How can I run better employee engagement so that I get them to put in 60 hours and not 50? It's not that game, because that doesn't improve performance a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's about working 50 hours a week on average, and then making the most of every hour you work, and not the most hours. And that's a big difference in terms of productivity. Again, we need to get away from this idea of working harder is the way to go.
Yeah, I remember trying to explain my process to the sales leaders, because there's me and a few other sort of
Yeah.
guys who are very high performers, but we didn't meet any of the metrics that they had in place. And I think it's because they couldn't understand, or we didn't even understand. I didn't even understand what I was doing, if I'm honest. I kind of just naturally found that route. No one trained me to take, much more time to research my prospect and come up with a plan and be more focused on it. It just seemed to me it didn't make sense to do the other way. Did you find that a lot of these successful leaders or employees were aware of the great things that they were doing, or was it something that they just did, if that makes sense? Were they
Yes, it does.
doing things?
No, I think right. No, many times it was intuitive, and
Intuitive.
the great thing about the great thing about being a researcher is that you go in and you listen to these people explaining what they did, and you can sort of then provide frameworks onto it.
Exactly.
And then I told them, I think you did this, and they said, that's what I did.
Yeah.
So I came up with two practices that people did. First, they challenged the status quo. They asked stupid questions, and they challenge conventions. So they might say, why are we doing things this way? Or they might be thinking it, right? I mean, one fantastic example from one of the cases in the book is that there was a principal of a high school in the United States. He was asking the question because he was leading a failing school. Students were failing. And he said, why are we sending kids home with homework? And people saying, huh? I mean, that's what we do, right? It's done across the world.
It's the way
It's been done like this for 300 years.
Yeah.
Said, wait a minute, I'm asking the question, why are we sending people home with homework when they're not really doing it? And many kids struggle at home because they have difficult homes. And he said, okay, maybe we shouldn't be doing it. And it led him to the process of what is called flipping the classroom, that they're doing homework at school and they're doing lecturing via video clips at home, reversing the process.
Interesting.
And he's the first principal in the entire United States who flipped the entire high school, 800 students, every class. It's done this way now. And the results are just incredible. Everything shot up 30%. The students are graduating in record numbers and so on. Same resources, same staff. He just asked a very stupid question. And it led to that innovation. So that's the one thing. We must ask stupid questions. And again, HR leaders should be walking around asking stupid questions. Why are things done this way and not that way? Is there a better way? The second thing is what I call pain points. Hunt for pain points. When people complain, and many people complain, that's a gift, because it means that something is wrong. And if you can fix that, you're adding value, right? And I think a lot of people sitting in IT and HR in particular, they get a lot of complaints. Why are things done this way? Why is this down? You know, and now you can't fix everything, but you can zoom in on the right ones and fix them. I mean, a quick example here is there was a person sitting in HR in one of the companies we studied, and she got almost every day, she got these phone calls from the insurance agents in her company about some kind of form for third-party sick leave that they had to fill in, which was so cumbersome. It doesn't matter what it is, but everybody complained about the process. And one day she had enough, and she picked up the phone to the IT department and said, can we develop a quick software solution so that people can just click on a few links and we will solve it? They got together a small project team. It was not costly at all. And they built this little web link, and problem solved. No more phone calls, right? And all these agents, thousands of agents calling her, no longer calling. That's fixing a pain point. And it wasn't her job description, right? To reach out to the IT, but she did it. Yeah. So asking stupid questions and looking for pain points are two great ways of adding value when you solve them.
Yeah, it's so important. I do think it all does come back down to the culture of the organization, because some companies, people don't feel they can ask those questions, and they don't feel that it's in their place. For example, that wasn't a role of that individual you just described. Right. And in many cases, people just keep that to themselves because they feel like that's not their job. It's not my job to intervene. You know, the amount of times that I would go to our marketing operations team and see a challenge from our customers, because I'm on the lower end. I'm the guy on the ground floor speaking to our customers, and I would get the response of, "You're a salesman, stick to sales. Don't worry about how we can improve marketing operations or the event." And I got that a lot, to the point where I just stopped trying to give my feedback. And then I worked in other organizations where they really encourage that and they want everyone to do that. So it's just a huge, and then what I would do, all of those great best practices that we had within our team, I wouldn't even share them with the rest of the company, because it got to the point where I'm like, well, I'll just stick within my group of influence. So all of these
absolutely. It's a lot harder in a company culture where if you come and suggest something is seen as an enemy or not invented here, or whatever defensive mechanism they put up. Absolutely. But again, I think HR leaders can provide enormous value by innovating how we work. Mm-hmm. And being that conduit is perhaps easier for them than you sitting over in sales, starting, walking over to marketing. HR can play that role a lot better. And if you think about it, we live in an era right now, an incredible inflection point, and it's a wonderful time to be an HR leaders, because we're questioning so much of how we work, and if we can make it so much better, then we're creating far different organizations. Again, back to annual performance reviews. That system was put in place about 70 years ago when people started doing that.
It drives me crazy.
It's a very old thing, right? But and then it became, take it for granted. And you're going to have the 360 process. You got to have the whole battery. And now people are saying, well, maybe we should do it differently. So it's a fantastic time to be an HR leader, because you maybe have the permission to start changing things. And we need to change the productivity gain in companies. If you look at productivity numbers across the board, they've been flat for a number of years. They're not going up. Mm-hmm. And this is a way to do it. You don't have to wait for the robots or the automation.
It's not going to solve everything.
No, it isn't going to solve anything. And if we can change a few things, right? Think about that guy in the warehouse who changed his metric from shipment going out of the warehouse to when it delivered. Now he had to change the way he worked, right? Because he had a new target now, but he was adding much more value, right? I had to reorganize my schedule. I had to prioritize differently, what goes out and so on. But it changes everything.
Yeah,
well, that's cool.
That's a good point that you identified, because a lot of I've worked with a lot of innovation directors in my career as well. Mm-hmm. And what you realize is change, innovation means change. People don't like change. Yeah. Their jobs, they could have been doing the same thing for 10 years. All of a sudden they have to do it a completely different way. Right. There's a huge barrier that you have to overcome with, these improvements a lot of times mean more work for those people, and they have to relearn and innovate themselves as well as
Right.
to do that.
And
And I
that's
think
another
that's a big
barrier
barrier.
to why people are not changing. I mean, I've learned to do a certain thing in a certain way. I follow certain steps, and I've done that for 20 years. And I don't want to change it. And I don't want somebody from HR to come and tell me how to do it
Yeah,
differently, right?
yeah, yeah,
And so on. But let's think about it this way. We talk about innovation. You mentioned innovation. Um, Products and services is where we think of innovation. And we have R&D departments, we have product development departments, we have businesses innovating left and right in products and services. But what about work innovation? How do we innovate work? And who should be leading that? And I think the opportunity is for HR.
yeah.
HR leaders should be the innovators of work. And it's a phenomenal opportunity for performance and productivity gains.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you need to kind of rethink HR. It's not about running a personnel department or running the classic HR function. It's about innovating work. It's an exciting area of opportunity.
But that's exactly why I called my event the HR Innovation Roundtable.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
For that exact purpose. For me,
Yep.
that is exactly where I see the impact, the value of HR, and where it can have the biggest impact is in what we've just discussed. So very exciting. Well, look, that leads us quite nicely onto the quick fire round, Morten. So
all right.
What's going to happen here? I'm going to ask you 5 questions, and you have no longer than 30 seconds to give us some answers. Are you ready?
Okay. I am ready.
Throwing you in the deep end.
And this was not set, so
everyone knows. Everyone's the same one. So don't
worry. Okay, very good. All right, let's go.
No problem. What was the number one thing that was holding you back from becoming a leader in your field of expertise?
The risk aversion. Having a cozy job as a BCG consultant and taking the risk to become an academic. I had to cross that kind of barrier, and I did it. Perhaps I could have done it earlier.
Fantastic. I certainly can relate to that. So amazing piece of amazing response there. What's the best piece of business advice that you've received?
It's been to find a purpose and follow your purpose, as opposed to following your passion. Passion is about what excites you. Purpose is what you give to the world. It's a different way of thinking about what you do. And I think that's a very valuable advice that I'm trying to pass on to my students.
Amazing. Definitely very important advice there. Aside from your own books, which we'll definitely link in the description, what's some books that you'd recommend to our audience, and why?
I think there are many great books out there right now in the world of business and management. Dan Pink's When, about the science of timing, is a great book. I think The Power of Moments by the Heath brothers, Dan and Chip Heath, is another wonderful book. And so those are 2 I would highly recommend.
Fantastic. Could you share some internet resources that you use to keep up to date with current events in your area, or that you use to keep, or you use to stay productive yourself?
Yeah. So, or to stay unproductive. Going on the internet too many times.
There's a balance. There's a balance.
Yeah, exactly. There's a balance there. I love management, everything about management. So I go on hbr.org. I follow LinkedIn. There's some wonderful LinkedIn blogs by many people. I think those 2 are great sources of advice and thinking around management. And so I use those 2 primarily these days.
Fantastic. And last question, what are you most excited about today? What most excites you right now in what you're doing?
This new book, Graded Work, is really not about the book. It's about what I hope is going to be a revolution, which is how can we help people work better so they will perform better and so that they will have better lives. That excites me enormous way, because I think we are at that inflection point where we can make work so much better. And I think HR leaders can play a massive role in that. And I hope to make my contribution, because I think we can change how hundreds of millions of people work and how they live their lives.
Amazing. Amazing. Look, Morten, you've been an amazing guest, and we really appreciate the actionable advice that you've provided. I know our members are going to be a lot better off for it. So prepare yourself. You're going to get a lot of LinkedIn messages after this podcast goes live. Before we part, give our listeners, if there's one piece of guidance you can give to HR leaders, what would that be? And also let us know where's the best place we can get in contact with you and learn more about your work.
Yeah, I think my best advice to HR leaders is to think of HR as a intimate partner with business managers and helping them change how they work and how people in their organizations work, change their metrics, go from volume to value, as we talked about. If you can do that, then you're adding enormous value as HR. And I think that's the promise of HR that is not been fulfilled yet, but it's possible. And I think some of the most innovative HR leaders are going in that direction. And it's a fantastic opportunity, but you need to see it that way. Mm-hmm. Then you can go to my website for more resources. It's mortenhansen.com, mortenhansen.com. And we have some extra resources there, including a quick assessment if you want to see how you score against the 7 key work practices in the book. And you can benchmark yourself against the 5,000 sample that we have.
Great. And you mentioned that you're going to be developing some workshops around this. When can we expect those to go live?
Yeah, that's probably within the next 3 to 4 months. I'm hoping that this book will really help the HR community. It's one of my really key audiences for this.
Fantastic. Well, look, guys, make sure you head over to hrleaders.com. There you'll find all of the show notes from the episode, everything we've been talking about. I'll throw all of the links in there for you guys as well. Again, Morten, thank you for taking the time to join us, and I look forward to speaking to you soon. Okay.
It's been an honor. Thank you so much.